Hi, my name's Hannah Bowen and I'm a senior here at OU. This video will serve as a lecture about the cultural misappropriation of Native American music and culture in American popular music from the time basically of early film till now. More specifically, I'll be discussing and defining the terms cultural misappropriation, singing red face, blackface minstrelsy, racial antipathy, idealized sympathy, cultural confusion, and playing Indian. In doing this, I'll discuss how each of these terms are represented in American popular music, like examples of that, and also how they each both contribute or show that there has been internalized stereotypes of Native Americans in a poor way and contribute to the propagation of those internalized stereotypes. And so in doing this, I'll also discuss how Cher commits singing red face in her song Half Breed and causes a lot of cultural confusion in that. And so from here, I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint so I can more effectively discuss this topic. To begin, I think it's most important to first define cultural misappropriation, since the rest of the terms kind of fall under the idea of it. So cultural misappropriation can be defined as the act of an outsider taking cultural elements from another culture to create a stereotype or represent that culture incorrectly in any way in order to profit. And so in terms of profiting, this could be in regards to status, personal gain, even comedy, and most importantly, economically, as we see in media and in music. It's important to note that cultural misappropriation is almost always deliberate. Historically, white Americans have been the main offenders of this. This has been seen in Singing Red Face and Blackface Minstrelsy, along with tons of other examples, but these two I'll define later and talk about more. It's clear that this is still occurring today, as we see in even current movies and current music. And since I'll be talking so much about internalized stereotypes in the rest of this presentation, I should define it first. And so when I speak of internalized stereotypes, it's referring to the assimilated stereotype that a person has about a culture, and in our case specifically Native Americans, that they don't necessarily even know is wrong because they have seen it so much. Where cultural misappropriation meets Native American culture in music and American popular music is in Singing Red Face. And so Singing Red Face can be defined as the use of racist Native American stereotypes in American popular music and other media like movies and music videos to increase revenue. The biggest offender of this is using the Pan-Indian stereotype, and the Pan-Indian stereotype is the diminishing of the diverse and unique set of Native American cultures into one pan or universal culture of Native Americans. And so this is born out of internalized stereotypes that was gained through popular American media, like movies early on and now in music, and it almost always represents Native Americans as a Plains American Indian. Another part of Singing Red Face that's found a lot is vague Native American sounding music. And this is often found in the drum beat where it's like 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4. But in reality, while people may think this sounds like Native American music, it's not representative of any culture. It's not found in any of the different cultures' music. So that would be considered Singing Red Face as well. It's often found in the visuals, lyrics, and music of the song, which I'll discuss when I discuss Cher's song Half Breed. And so Singing Red Face has been developed from early film and is now propagated through music today. We saw this in Peter Pan in the animated version, where all the Native Americans are represented as this Pan-Indian, Plains American Indian, where they have feathers and red skin and they're painting their face, which is an incorrect representation, but that was propagated through that film And now artists like Tim McGraw and Cher and Paul Revere and the Raiders are using these same types of stereotypes that were developed long ago at the very start of the film industry. I wanted to talk about Singing Red Face first because it's the topic of the lecture, but now it's important to discuss the history of white Americans culturally misappropriating other cultures. And so most notably there's blackface minstrelsy. And so this is the misappropriation of black culture used by white Americans to profit from it in minstrel shows. This is a super simple definition, but that's generally just what it was. And so they used incredibly incorrect portrayal of black Americans where they would paint their faces black and then just do this way over-the-top caricature of black Americans and mostly represented them as uneducated and used them as the butt of the joke every single time to get people to come to these minstrel shows. And so this has created, or at least it did create, an internalized stereotype of black Americans where white Americans, they assimilated this idea of these minstrel shows to all black Americans, and then they formed these stereotypes in their head, which then came to life. And so the biggest thing that came from this was the idea of Jim Crow. And so everybody knows Jim Crow laws, and it's basically just trying to keep black Americans down no matter what. And then the importance of blackface minstrelsy in this lecture is just to show that white Americans have a history of misappropriating different cultures in incredibly damaging ways. And while blackface is now, most people realize that it's very bad, it's been realized, singing red face hasn't yet. And so I think we're waiting for this cultural awakening to see that singing red face is really just the same thing as blackface minstrelsy and is very close to just as damaging to Native American culture and their ideas. Racial antipathy is important to define simply because that is what led to the stereotypes like singing red face and blackface minstrelsy. So racial antipathy is just intensely negative feelings of other races. And so how a lot of negative stereotypes are born are through racial antipathy. One day one person says something really negative about a race that they don't like, and then people hear it and it spreads, and it becomes this internalized stereotype where people have assimilated this negative stereotype with a certain culture, and in this case Native Americans, and then that gets propagated through American popular music. This has been seen in the song Indian Giver by Annette Funicello. The term Indian Giver, which is born out of racial antipathy for supposedly the way that Native Americans give gifts, where they give it and then want it back. But that isn't true. That was just born out of a misunderstanding between people a long time ago. And so in using this term, it spreads it, and it propagates singing red face into music and into other people. Something much different than racial antipathy is idealized sympathy, which is sympathy towards the caricature stereotype of a culture rather than empathy for the issues and difficulties that the culture is facing. And so this has been seen in sympathy towards the drunken Indian in popular music, where they're sympathizing for a drunken Indian and how bad his life is, but the drunken Indian is just a stereotype. It's not true in any way. So in singing about it, even though they're trying to sympathize with that person, it's still propagating this incorrect and negative stereotype. And more specifically, Paul Revere and the Raiders, in their song Indian Reservation, they do this, and one example is when they say, "Took away our ways of life, the tomahawk and the bow and the knife." When they do this, first of all, they're spreading incorrect information where people think that that's all that Native Americans are their tomahawk and bow and knife. They're not tools that they use, that's what they are, which is incorrect. But it also reduces Native Americans to an artifact. And so even though they're trying to be sympathetic to Native Americans that had everything taken away from them, they're still sympathizing with an incorrect idea of what Native Americans are and reduce them to this artifact, this thing that used to be, which is singing red face. Idealized sympathy leads to cultural confusion, which is the idea that most people don't know what is authentic information and what is not. And this is primarily due to the spread of incorrect information in American popular music. And so this cultural confusion is due to internalized stereotypes that have been established through time. But since stereotypes are internalized, people are not conscious that they have assimilated these stereotypes in their heads, which are typically negative. And this is seen in Indian Outlaw by Tim McGraw, specifically when he says, "They all gather around my teepee." And so while certain Native American cultures used to live in teepees, by the time he wrote this song, that was not the case. And then he also assimilates all Native Americans with the teepee, which is also incorrect. So he's spreading this idea of pan-Indianism where all Native Americans are the same, and then also spreading this idea that Native Americans still live in teepees everywhere, which causes cultural confusion because people automatically assume that this information that they're hearing in this song is correct, and so then they go and spread it even more. This brings us to playing Indian, because I believe that cultural confusion that children are exposed to at early ages contributes greatly to the whole idea of playing Indian. And so playing Indian is pretending to be part of the Native American culture, whether this is dressing up as Native Americans in costumes, playing children's games like Cowboys and Indians, or in music. In music, a lot of people play Indian by dressing up as Native Americans for videos or album covers, as well as play a poor representation of Native American music in their songs, and use lyrics that portray themselves as Native Americans in an incorrect light. And so this is seen in Cher's Half-Breed, where she's practically playing Indian the entire song and entire music video, which is kind of the definition of singing red face because she's profiting from it. And so to tie it all together, I'll talk about Cher's song Half-Breed and the music video. And I'll talk a little bit more about her playing Indian on the next slide, where I've put up a picture from the music video, but she dresses in Plains American Indian clothing, kind of a pan-Indian image, but it's not an actual representation of anything. She uses a totem pole, which is not even the same Native American culture as Plains American Indians, and she's bareback horse riding. She also uses inauthentic drum beats, and she uses a word for Native American women that is a very, very negative word. And so when she says it in her song, it kind of leads other people to believe that they can say it too. Another thing that's seeing red face in her in the lyrics is she says, "My mother's people were ashamed of me." So in the song, and in real life, she claims that she's half Cherokee from her mother's side, but in saying that her mother's people were ashamed of her, it propagates this idea of, a savage, angry Indian, which is not true. From everything that we've learned in this class. Native American people have always been very, very nice and accepting of anybody, particularly people that are going to be a part of their culture. And so I think Cher spreads enormous cultural confusion by claiming that she's Native American, which she might be, and her experiences should not be invalidated. But when she claims that she's Native American and uses all these negative and stereotypical things about Native Americans, it spreads cultural confusion because people think, oh, she's Native American, she must know. And so that contributes to the overall singing red face scene in this song. And ultimately what ties together the singing red face is that she gains economically from misrepresenting and misappropriating the Native American culture. Here's the image from her music video where you can see that she's playing Indian. Not only is she representing the Native American culture in an incorrect way by not dressing in authentic clothing and such, she's also contributing to the idea of the Pan-Indian, which reduces Native American culture to just one culture rather than their distinct cultures that there are. And she does this by using a totem pole and then Plains American Indian and putting that together, which they're not a part of the same Native American culture. And so Cher's not the only artist who has done this, so I think it's important that the artists who have done this first realize what they've done and then take responsibility for it and to describe to people how they were incorrect, and hopefully this can help stop seeing red face in the future.